In the last few years, so much more is being understood about sleep, and there's been so much research about what the lack of sleep does to the body. And the brain doesn't have traditional lymph nodes like the rest of the body, but it does have a lymphatic system, so to speak, and it's called the glymphatic system, and it's that system that's responsible for eliminating the waste of the brain, and it's during sleep that process happens. And so if you're not getting adequate sleep, then that process is shortened and there's a potential for those proteins to get left behind. And a lot of people boast about how little sleep they get, namely a lot of these high-powered people, including our presidents. And they say they only get 4 to 6 hours of sleep. So you can say that they have a dirty brain. Their brains aren't getting quite cleaned. So imagine what their potential capacity would be if they were getting more sleep. So over half of employees studied in a recent study said that they didn't get enough sleep, and 1 in 5 call in sick so that they can catch up on sleep. And like I alluded to a minute ago, scientists are now theorizing that this byproduct being left behind in the brain, secondary to not sleeping adequate amounts, leads to these proteins being left behind and increases the likelihood of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's. So it's super important to get the required amount of sleep. So what is that amount? Adults aged 24 to 64 should be getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Too much sleep, so over 10 hours of sleep, can be a problem as well as too little. So less than 6 is also a problem. The ideal perfect world scenario is 8. So the more days that you can strive for that, the more nights that you can strive for getting 8 consistent hours of sleep, the better it is for you in the long run. And everybody's heard that before. It's not a whole lot of new information. Get 8 hours of sleep, but if you kind of put these practices into place, you can try to aim to get more sleep than you have been getting recently. So some few tips is to make sure you exercise. Exercise releases a lot of endorphins that make you feel good, but the key is not to do that exercise at least 3 hours. Do not do strenuous exercise at least 3 hours before bedtime. Mild stretching like yoga is fine, but doing strenuous exercise does increase those endorphins and adrenaline, and it can make you too wound up to go to sleep. So exercise is good for your health and it's good for sleep and promote sleep, but make sure you're not doing it at least 3 hours before bedtime. And even if you can just do at least 30 minutes during the day, it will help promote better sleep. Also, in taking healthy foods, a lot of times people reach for unhealthy snacks, especially now. It's really difficult not to reach for those chips because things have been so stressful. But and especially if you're eating not only junk food, but a lot of heavy items right before bed, it can inhibit good quality sleep. Because if your body is working to digest that heavy meal using all of the organs that it needs to process that meal, it's not resting and regenerating for daytime activity. So it can't do the job it needs to do to clean the brain and rest up for the next day if it's working on processing that meal, and may make it difficult for you to fall asleep and stay asleep. Also, of course, limit caffeinated food and beverages, but try to do that at least 8 hours before bedtime. So if your bedtime is 10 p.m., try not to have any caffeinated beverages after 2 p.m. And I know that's hard for a lot of people, but if you're having sleep difficulties, that's one of the things that you should really try to implement, even if you can just cut down by half after 2 to the amount of caffeine that you're ingesting, and then start working on eliminating it. It will help your sleep onset. And of course, alcohol. Stress and anxiety are at an all-time high right now, and so is alcohol consumption. And these things may seem relaxing initially, but it can hinder good sleep habit. It can hinder the deep REM sleep. So even though it may seem like, oh, I'm just having a couple glasses of wine at dinner because it helps relax me, it may be the reason that you're having a hard time. You may be able to fall asleep okay, but it may be the reason why you're having a hard time staying asleep or waking up feeling rested the next day, because it may be a restless, fitful sleep. Um, and then light therapy, if you can use, of course, sunlight and bright lights during the day to sort of wake yourself up. And try to restrict and limit the amount of light, especially artificial light that you're exposed to, that your retinas are exposed to in the evening hours, especially 1 hour before bedtime. So as far as medications, they're not all medications are bad, especially if you're in a period of acquired sleep debt. Then it may be beneficial to take sleep aids to catch you up on sleep. But the problem arises when you can only sleep when those meds are taken, because your body's either become dependent on them or it stopped producing that sleep aid on its own because it's receiving it exogenously. So melatonin is an example. It's readily available. So easy to dose and use. There's all kinds of forms of it. And so people think, well, it's over the counter, it's easy to use, it's, you know, it's over the counter, so I must be able to use it, it must be safe. But families end up getting parents, patients end up getting dependent on it because your body says, oh, well, I'm getting this medication or hormone exogenously, so I don't need to produce it. So if you ever stop, um, a lot of times you'll have a hard time going back to sleep, or you'll end up needing more and more of it. So like I said, it's fine to use here and there. I love melatonin for jet lag, but when using it every day, it ends up um, biting you in the butt and the back end and backfiring. So try to restrict it if you can, or at least work on decreasing it gradually to work on eliminating it. And then, of course, medications that some people may not realize that you take can also alter sleep, like meds for ADD, as well as like certain cough medicines. So be mindful of that if you're having difficulty falling asleep. And talk to your doctor about weaning yourself off these medications if you are on them. Don't go cold turkey, but decreasing it by a half a dose or a quarter of a dose every few days or every week or so may help in the long run to get yourself off of it. So what do you do when you can't sleep? What happens a lot of times is people just say, well, I know I have to be up early. I have so much work to do. I have so much going on. I should be sleeping. Why aren't I sleeping? And you just keep laying in bed and tossing and turning and trying to sleep. So instead of doing that, get up, go walk around the house, read a book, like a book on an actual physical book. Try to journal, especially if your mind is kind of like racing of like, I have this to do, that to do, this happened today, whatever. Write it down so it sort of gets off your head. Get a snack, a sip of water, meditate, or like I said, do some mild stretching. And I know Dr. Hutchings is going to do a chair yoga later today. So maybe that would be useful to learn so that you can do that if you're having trouble sleeping at night. And then lay back down in the bed once you're feeling sleepy again. And know that that may take another hour and a half or up to 3 hours for you to transition into that next sleep cycle and become sleepy again. So if you're laying there tossing and turning for 2 hours and then you're like frustrated that you can't get to sleep, instead of doing that for that period of time, just get up right away, go take a walk, do that stuff that we just talked about, and then try to lay back in bed. Try not to get on a screen at that time because, again, it'll, even with the red lights, the red light filter, it'll trigger wakefulness at that time. So if you can avoid getting on a screen, that would be best. And try to, like I said, read a book, get a sip of water, walk around, and then try again when you're feeling sleepy again. So the there's a study that was done, and it measured the well-being index, and that those 5 elements are what people represented as purpose in their life, social interactions, financial stability, community, and physical health. And those that got 8 hours of sleep per night had the highest well-being score. So in summary, the better you sleep, the less stressed and anxious you'll feel, and the less anxious you feel, the better you'll sleep, which will ultimately make you happier in the end. And that's the thing we're all sort of striving for, right? So try to aim for that 8 hours of sleep. I know it's difficult, and there's a lot of distractions and a lot of things in the way that are preventing that, but it's doable. It's just a matter of being consistent and kind of taking that as your taking a lead in it and say, I'm going to prioritize my sleep for my long-term health.